This is INBrief with Rebecca Jacques, Head of Wealth Management Solutions at Mercer. First of all, Rebecca, thank you very much for attending and participating in the Inside Network's Investment Leaders Forum Noosa 2026.
Thank you for having me, James.
It's a great pleasure. Rebecca, as you scan the investment landscape today, what are some of the really major market themes that advisors should have front of mind?
Look, obviously, one of the biggest themes I think that people really need to focus on is that both the geopolitical and investment landscape has fundamentally changed. And it's structurally changing the way we've previously invested and what we expect as a norm. So if you, at the base level, look at it, we now have inflation in the system. It's not massively high, skyrocketing inflation, but it's certainly different from that sort of zero line that we came from. We're also in a period of much lower growth, and that means that asset classes are not necessarily delivering the way that they used to deliver in terms of a return profile, but also in terms of how they behave relative to one another. So I think you've got to really grasp that landscape and then look at it and go, so the world we're investing into now is different than what it was for the last 20, 30, even 40 years.
For example, precious metals, they're back in so many conversations, back in so many portfolios, playing possibly a different role than investors might have thought. What role do you see them playing in portfolios going forward?
And look, it's interesting, right, because precious metals clearly are right at the forefront at the moment. But if you look back over really the last sort of few decades, right, commodities as a general rule have not outperformed equities over that period of time. And there's some real reasons why. One, we were in a much lower interest rate environment. Also, there was supply, sort of abundance of it and things like that. And then we weren't structurally really, in terms of en masse, moving to a whole entire new sort of energy sort of deployment, let alone tech. Then you add into that what's going on. So by the time you change your economic landscape, right, and the interest rate environment, which is now slightly more favorable towards commodities, then you add into it those sort of supply side issues, the transitioning that we're going through, the tech sort of side. There's a huge sort of swell underneath that's going to, create the actual conversion of that demand into an actual return in commodities. So they are something that people should look at. And this sort of probably plays a little bit to what I was talking about before. A lot of people base their knowledge on what has transpired over the last sort of 20 years. But what transpired over the last 20 years is not necessarily what's going to transpire going forward, right? And that's that sort of backdrop. Yes, we know commodities have typically underperformed equities over that sort of 40-year period, but that's not necessarily where we're going to be going forward. So adding them into portfolios starts to become a priority, right? Not just for diversification and not just to just sort of benefit from the return profile, but also just to sort of get your portfolio sort of much more all-weather and fit for the future state.
What about digital assets? Because they've really only come to the fore in recent years, and they still divide opinion. It's been amazing to watch the market try to deal with them, how to think about them. So what's Mercer's view about how advisors should approach digital assets?
Yeah, and look, it's complex, right? Because if you look at digital assets, they span thousands of derivations of all sorts. And that in itself creates a whole lot of sort of issues, and how do you value them? And, they don't have the store of value that we think of in traditional assets. If you just take a sort of big picture view, we believe that ultimately they're speculative investments at this stage, right? That doesn't mean they don't have a place in a portfolio. It's just be aware that the normal drivers of what you are putting into a traditional portfolio is not what's necessarily driving those sort of digital assets. If you look more specifically at sort of like the Bitcoins, the Ethereums, those sorts of ones, the real issue becomes the technology platform that they're on. So is that technology platform going to exist and have a place in a portfolio? Absolutely. Is digital assets in their current form the way to get hold of them? Probably not necessarily, in the sense that they're still much more speculative than they are based on any sort of valuation metric or sort of future state. But do we believe that digital assets in some genre of shape or form will become an asset that we hold in portfolios in the future? We do. We're just not quite there yet as to what we would sort of like, hang our hat on and say, this is definitely going to be here in the future.
When you think about your career across investment and advice, in terms of leadership, what are some of the traits you've seen or maybe the best piece of advice you've ever received on what leadership should look like?
Yeah, I mean, so to me, a lot of the leadership that I've sort of respected is lead by example, right? So it's sort of that old saying, do as you say, not do as I do, sort of. Or I think it's the reverse of that, isn't it? But the leaders that really get people to follow them and get people behind them are people who actually do what they're saying they're going to do, right? And I think that still, works today. I mean, I know leadership's taken quite a massive shift with when you look at things like, people who are influencers and all the rest of it. I still think though that you look at it, they tend to be short-lived, right? So they rise to fame and then they disappear. And it's largely because I think they don't do what they say they're doing, right? So to me, it's always been leaders who actually lead by themselves and actually do and follow what they're actually saying.
You've got your own teenagers, Rebecca. What do you think about the crop of young people entering the industry? Are you really excited by the way they think and what's possible for them?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, I'm sure every generation says this about the next, but I in some respects, I'm glad I'm not a teenager, right? I'm really glad that I got to grow up away from that constant scrutiny that they're under. I don't envy them that at all. But I think that they're going to live in a vastly different world to what we live in. I mean, I look at it, I've got a P plater and an L plater at the moment. We already have a self-driving car as well, right? So just even at that level, you look at and go, so yeah, they're still going to need mobility for freedom like we did. But, I know we're teaching them how to drive, but I mean, how quickly is that going to be redundant, right? I mean, and the other day, we went and got one of those robotic vacuums, right? And I had to laugh because what was amusing about it is we all stood and watched the robotic vacuum. So it wasn't very efficient in the sense that really we should have just been doing it. But it's interesting how we just adopt this sort of stuff, right? Very easily, right? And their ability to change and transform is going to be incredible. But I'm sort of glad I'm not going through it at that age, at all.
Rebecca Jacques from Mercer, thank you very much for your time today.
No, thank you, James.